Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and also make sure to like, comment, and ring the bell to stay up to date on future uploads. Today I'll be talking about the Cup race at Atlanta, and given that this was the race where we saw that epic 3-wide finish last year that blew up the internet and even made national sport headlines, I had high expectations for this race. The weather was cloudy, temperatures were cool, kind of like the theme for the entire weekend, but again, no chance of rain, thankfully. While we didn't see much action to start this race compared to last year, we did see some handling play a big part from the start of the race. By the end of stage 1, several teams were complaining about their cars being tight, and this goes back to what I mentioned yesterday about the track surface starting to age and how that would alter the racing product moving forward to such an extent that we could see elements of mid-2000s Daytona at this track. And we did see some of that, especially in the long runs as more and more drivers started complaining about their handling, like I said. The Fords did extremely well in qualifying, particularly Penske, RFK, Front Row, and the Penske affiliated Wood Brothers. All 10 of their cars qualified in the top 11. Only Kyle Busch managed to break them up with his 6th place starting spot, but if it wasn't for him, it would have been a clean sweep of the top 10 between those 4 teams, which is really crazy. That being said, the general thought process was that the Fords would struggle with handling in the long run, especially if everyone else ganged up on them and started forcing them down to the bottom lane, which is what ended up happening to some extent in the first 2 stages as the Toyotas and Chevys started to make moves towards the front. And while most of the Fords were broken up this way and started to slowly fade back through the field, those Penske cars just stayed up front leading laps. Josh Berry won stage 1. He was not a Penske driver, but the Wood Brothers have a close alliance with them, so he technically counts as one, especially on drafting tracks. And Joey Logano was in control of stage 2 up until the very end when the Hendrick cars got the jump on them on the final restart of the stage, which led to Larson getting the stage win, which was his first ever stage win on a drafting track, by the way, so shout out to that. Granted, he did get involved in an incident later on, which we will talk about, but at least he got something out of this race, which is something that I unfortunately cannot say for the likes of Daniel Suarez, for example, who entered this race as the defending winner at what was statistically his best track, but he came back empty-handed after he, as well as his Trackhouse teammates, they all qualified outside the top 25. Suarez stayed around mid-pack pretty much all race, so he didn't get any stage points. And even after stage 3, flipped the strategy around and placed his other 2 teammates towards the front, he just could not find his way to the front. And this eventually led to him getting caught up in a stack-up between some of the Toyotas, and he ended up wrecking out in a multi-car crash. And speaking of the Toyotas, they also didn't qualify well either. Only Reddick and Bubba Wallace managed to crack the top 20. Every other Toyota qualified like 25th or worse. I know all 4 Joe Gibbs racing cars did. So a lot of rough outings for a couple of those guys, especially in stage 3 where we saw plenty of wrecks that thinned out the field. I mentioned Suarez getting involved in one of those wrecks. Ty Gibbs also had a rough day. Same with Chris Buescher, Alex Bowman, Cole Custer, and Noah Gragson, just to name a few. Chase Elliott also got caught up in an incident. His incident happened late in stage 2 when Stenhouse and Chase Briscoe got together, and that sent the 47 into the 9, who hit the wall, broke the toe link, spun out, and collected LaJoy and Brad Keselowski. And one thing I will say about that, because the instant reaction all over social media was to blame Stenhouse for that. Bro, he and Briscoe clearly made contact if you go back and watch the replay. So I would chalk that up to just a racing incident rather than just Stenhouse being Stenhouse. Still not a good look for him to just be in the center of every single incident, because he was at the center of a huge crash last week in the 500 and now this incident. So they just keep piling up for him. Fortunately for Elliott, however, he was able to get that repaired and finish the race on the lead lap after getting the free pass later on. And it was all thanks to the new DVP. And with all these wrecks and incidents, this is where we really saw it in action. And it did its job just as good as we all thought. as teams were able to work on their damaged cars either on pit road or in the garage after the clock expired, allowing those cars to continue racing despite crash damage that would have previously resulted in a DNF under the old DVP. So the only point of contention that I have, though, is the whole "you got 3 laps to make minimum speed" part of the rule, because it doesn't specify whether those 3 laps must be under green, which I think they should. And this can lead to situations like the one that we saw last week with Kyle Busch, where he was unable to continue after getting wrecked late in the race because his car did not meet minimum speed after 3 laps. Thing is, however, the 3 laps he had to meet minimum speed were all yellow flag laps, like caution laps. You obviously cannot make minimum race speed under yellow, so I feel NASCAR needs to address that section of the rule book. But other than that, I vibe with this new damaged vehicle policy. Some people would take exception to how if your tires are flat and you cannot drive the car back to pit road by yourself, the car will be towed to the garage, and how that's a very steep punishment over something that is largely out of the driver's control. And while I do agree it's an issue, I don't think the DVP is to blame for that. I think it's more of a Gen 7 car design flaw, more specifically the underbody of the car. Like, if NASCAR fixed the underbody to where you could drive it back to pit road even if all 4 of your tires were flat, you wouldn't see people complain or blaming the DVP for causing this. But yeah, this new DVP as a whole is a major improvement. And Michael McDowell was a perfect example of that, actually, because early in the race, McDowell, he lost power steering and he couldn't race in the draft because of that. So during the stage caution, the team worked on it. He came back 6 laps down with the issue already fixed. And with the several cautions that came out afterwards, he was able to get all 6 of his laps back and finish a very solid 13th. You know, just for that, now that I think about it, you know, to heck with that. I will give McDowell driver of the day, because even with the new DVP and this happening early in the race, this race looked like just about a lost cause for that 71 team. But to their credit, they did the unthinkable and managed to create something out of nothing. So great job by Michael McDowell and crew out there. Big shout out to them. So going back to the race, unfortunately we had some controversy towards the end. For the 2nd straight week, we had some BS happening that altered the outcome of a race. The race ended in overtime, first of all, after Larson put Cindric in the wall off of turn 2. This after Larson's spotter told him that he was clear when he really wasn't. And this caused the 2 car to wreck and collect Larson's teammate Byron in the process. Now, admittedly, and Larson has said this numerous times about himself, that he is far from the best at drafting tracks and he's not used to making those types of moves, but that still doesn't excuse what he just did out there, okay? If I'm Austin Cindric, I'm remembering that next time I'm racing around the 5. As for what happened in overtime, and this really pissed me off, because we were about to get a repeat of last year's 3-wide finish, this time with Christopher Bell, Larson, and Carson Hocevar. And speaking of Hocevar, because I never got a chance to talk about him, the dude was all over the place out there. He was super aggressive. He made a ton of risky moves, both on offense and defense. Several teams' radio conversations mentioned how the 77 was being just an absolute menace at some point of the race. And he pissed a lot of people off, as you would expect. Off the top of my head, I know Kyle Busch got mad at him over the radio. He then spun Blaney out late in the race, which led to a really sick save by the 12 car, by the way. And Blaney also finished the race in 4th, too, so great recovery there for him. He did have some words with Hocevar after the race, though. Actually, him and Ross Chastain had some words with him. Kyle Larson, I believe, pointed out an incident with Hocevar that frustrated him. So if you manage to keep count, that means Hocevar got 4 drivers mad at him in one race. At least 4 drivers. I don't know who else he managed to piss off. And I'm going to say, could you imagine if he won the race after all that stuff he did? Could you imagine like the outrage there will be on social media? Because Hocevar has become somewhat polarizing in the past couple of years. He's a great personality off track, but on track, his driving style is extremely divisive. And this is why we're mad at NASCAR for throwing the caution on the last lap for an incident that was relatively minor compared to the Xfinity race on Saturday when they let them race back to the line as just about 1/3 of the field wiped out behind them. On the same spot too, coming up turn 2 into the backstretch, that's where the accident began. That last caution ruining what would have otherwise been another mainstream moment on national media, another all-time finish. Now, of course, it is worth mentioning that NASCAR, they did state during the drivers' meeting before the race that they messed up with officiating with the Xfinity race control messed up the end of the Xfinity race, and that they should have thrown the caution at the end, and that they wouldn't let them race back to the line should a wreck happen on the backstretch of the last lap. They wouldn't officiate like they did in Xfinity, and lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So yeah, I cannot be mad at NASCAR for standing on business and following through on their word today. What I can be mad about, however, is their inconsistency regarding their officiating during the last laps of the race. Because last week during the 500, they let them race back to the line, even as almost the entire field wiped out. It's this thing with NASCAR that sometimes, and I don't know what goes on race control, the heads of race control sometimes, but sometimes they choose to let them race back to the line. Other times they throw the caution immediately. And the funniest part is that no matter what decision they make, it always ends up backfiring in the most spectacular way possible, and it ends up creating discourse like what's going on right now that ultimately overshadows, what would have otherwise been the main headline of the event, which is X driver winning the race and whatever narrative that driver has that accompanies the win. Instead, we have this. And notice how I haven't even mentioned the race winner at all. It's because people won't remember this race for who won it. They will remember it for yet another instance of race control sucking the fun away from us by throwing an ill-timed caution on the last lap. And for that alone, I'm going to knock this race down to a B-. Had it not been for that last caution, I would have given this race an A or even an A+, given the fact that they would have finished 3 wide. That finish, they were setting up to be a 3 wide finish, because the racing leading up to those final few laps was amazing. I believe we were on pace to break the track record for lead changes. I don't know if the record was broken at the end, but it was pretty damn close last time I checked. Imagine if NASCAR kept the race green all the way though, and who knows who wins between Bell, Larson, or Hocevar in that situation. But just for the sake of argument, let's assume Christopher Bell still wins, just like he actually ended up doing. If he does, the storyline would have then been that he won despite him and his Toyota teammates all qualifying poorly. I believe Bell started like 32nd or something like that. I know he qualified outside the top 30. And he managed to barely edge out the 5 and 77 in a 3 wide photo finish to lead his only lap of the race and steal the win away from the Chevys. And it also would have given Joe Gibbs Racing their first win in 8 months. They hadn't won since June of last year at New Hampshire. That's almost like 20 races, an almost 20 race winless streak. So that would have been a great storyline if the race stayed green. Now, if Kyle Larson won, it would have been his first career Cup win at a drafting track, and of course he also would have won it in dramatic fashion. And if Carson Hocevar won, I mean, I already mentioned the discourse that there will be all over NASCAR Twitter for that, considering his how many people he managed to piss off the entire race. Not to mention, it would have also been his first career Cup win as well, and it would have been a huge milestone for him. So that's 3 potential storylines that got thrown out of the window because NASCAR Race Control wanted to stay true to their word at all costs. And while I do applaud them for, again, standing on business when they say they would officiate the race a certain way if it came down to that, I do not want them to take this course of action moving forward. You either throw the yellow at all times or you don't. You know, this is all very similar to the topic of team orders, where NASCAR, they used to look at those situations when they happen on a case-by-case basis. Of course, that was finally fixed when they removed all gray areas in the rulebook and they picked the side of we are against team orders and anyone who commits such an act will be severely penalized. I just wish NASCAR did the same with their officiating. We really thought this year would be different when Race Control let them boys race back to the line on the last lap of the 500, only for them to turn back the very next week and throw the caution for an even lesser incident. It's just so frustrating, man. Every week it seems like there's always some controversy. First, it was the Parker Kligerman DQ last week, and now we have this. What will happen next week? I don't even want to know.